Rain hammered the black SUVs as they carved through the empty streets before dawn, headlights cutting across pools of crimson that spread over the pavement. The city's most feared mafia boss stepped from the lead vehicle without flinching at the gunfire echoing somewhere in the distance. Men twice his size waited for orders with rifles raised, but their leader's attention never drifted toward the dying rivals lying near the warehouse entrance. His cold gray eyes fixed on something far stranger. A young woman was running. She clutched the little girl against her chest, stumbling through the storm in soaked sneakers, her face streaked with tears and blood. One arm wrapped protectively around the child while the other struggled to keep a torn backpack from slipping away. Behind her came another sound, an engine screaming, tires spinning across wet asphalt, closing the distance with terrifying speed. She didn't see the convoy until she nearly collapsed against its armored grille. The child cried once before burying her face into the woman's shoulder. The woman looked up. For a single heartbeat, every armed guard around the convoy froze. She recognized a man standing before her, and he recognized her. 3 years had passed since Isabella Hart had disappeared without leaving a single goodbye. 3 years since she had walked away from the only man ruthless enough to terrify entire criminal empires, yet gentle enough to imagine a future beyond violence whenever she smiled. She had vanished as though she had never existed. Now she stood in front of him, barely recognizable. A purple bruise darkened one cheek. Her lower lip was split. Finger-shaped marks wrapped around her wrist. The oversized sweater hanging from her shoulders could not hide the fading yellow bruises blooming along her collarbone. She wasn't running from the police. She wasn't running from rival gangs. She was running from someone who had already broken her. The pursuing pickup truck screeched around the corner. Its driver leaned halfway through the window with a pistol aimed directly toward the woman. The shot never landed. A sniper hidden atop a nearby rooftop fired first. The windshield exploded. The truck spun sideways into a concrete barrier before rolling onto its roof in a shower of sparks. Silence settled over the street. The mafia boss never looked toward the wreckage. His gaze remained fixed on Isabella. She instinctively stepped backward, shielding the child as though he were the greatest danger present. That tiny movement pierced deeper than any bullet. Without speaking, he shrugged off his expensive black overcoat and held it toward her. She hesitated. The child looked up with frightened eyes and whispered something too soft for anyone else to hear. Only then did Isabella slowly accept the coat, wrapping it around herself before clutching the little girl even tighter. The mafia soldiers exchanged uneasy glances. Their boss had executed men for less than pointing a weapon in his direction. Yet now he stood perfectly still before a woman who looked as though life itself had declared war against her. One of his captains approached carefully. "The warehouse is secure." The mafia boss ignored him. Another lieutenant leaned closer. "Our enemies escaped through the river tunnels." Still nothing. Every criminal under his command understood the meaning of that silence. The mission had ended the moment she appeared. He took one careful step forward. She immediately stepped back. Fear flashed across her exhausted face. Not fear of the killers surrounding them, but fear that trusting anyone again might finally destroy what little remained of her. His expression never changed. Only those who had served him for years noticed the nearly invisible tightening of his jaw. He had spent decades mastering control. Tonight, control was beginning to crack. His eyes drifted toward the little girl. She couldn't have been older than 5. Dark curls framed her frightened face. She hid behind Isabella, but continued staring curiously at the silent man wearing an expensive tailored suit despite the pouring rain. The resemblance struck him unexpectedly, not in appearance, in the stubborn way she refused to cry. His memories returned without warning. Late-night coffee shared across tiny apartment tables. Promises whispered before sunrise. Dreams abandoned because one of them belonged to darkness while the other believed people could still be saved. He had accepted losing her. He had never accepted not knowing why. Now every answer seemed written across the bruises covering her body. A medic approached with a blanket. Before he could reach her, Isabella flinched violently as though expecting another blow. The medic stopped immediately. No one spoke. The storm swallowed every sound except distant thunder. Finally, the mafia boss removed one black leather glove. Slowly, carefully, he reached toward her bruised wrist, not to grab it, only to inspect the swollen skin. She instinctively pulled away. His hand remained suspended in the rain. For the first time in years, witnesses saw genuine emotion break through the mask of the city's most feared criminal. Not anger, not hatred, Something colder. Something infinitely more dangerous. The kind of silence that always came before entire families disappeared. His security chief received a single encrypted message through his earpiece. The investigation team had already identified the overturned truck's owner. A name appeared on the screen. Daniel Cross, Isabella's former fiancé. The same man who had quietly married her less than 2 years after she vanished. The same man with no criminal record, respectable business connections, and a spotless public reputation. No one around the convoy knew that the name had just become a death sentence. The Mafia boss slipped his glove back on. His voice emerged calm enough to chill everyone present. Take them home. No one dared ask which home, because every soldier understood he meant his own heavily guarded estate. As Isabella looked at him through frightened, exhausted eyes, she believed she had escaped one nightmare only to enter another. She had no idea that before the sun rose, someone else would vanish without leaving a trace. And when daylight finally reached the city, would the truth about her scars destroy the man who ruled its underworld, or unleash the monster even his enemies feared? The estate rose above the city like a fortress carved from stone and silence. Layers of security sealed every entrance, armed guards patrolled every corridor, and cameras watched every shadow. It was the safest place in the country, and to Isabella, it felt like another prison. She barely slept. Every unexpected sound sent her racing toward the little girl's room. Every knock on the bedroom door made her heart pound against her ribs. The child, Lily, noticed everything. She smiled when she thought Isabella needed strength and stayed unusually quiet whenever fear returned to her mother's eyes. She had learned far too young how to survive inside someone else's anger. The Mafia boss watched from a distance. He didn't question her. He didn't demand explanations. He simply ordered the estate physician to examine her injuries. The report arrived before dawn. Broken ribs that had healed badly, repeated fractures in 2 fingers, old burns, fresh bruises, signs of prolonged physical abuse. The physician quietly admitted something even more disturbing. These injuries weren't caused by one incident. They happened over many months. The room fell silent. Several captains looked toward their boss. His face remained unreadable. Only the crystal glass in his hand cracked beneath the pressure of his grip. Without another word, he walked away. Everyone understood what that silence meant. Meanwhile, across the city, the overturned truck had become the center of another storm. Daniel Cross wasn't dead. He had escaped moments before the vehicle crashed. Now he sat inside a luxurious penthouse surrounded by heavily armed men wearing expensive suits instead of gang colors. He wasn't simply an abusive husband. He worked for the Romano Syndicate, a rival criminal empire that had quietly expanded while everyone believed Daniel was nothing more than a respectable businessman. Their leader studied surveillance photos taken outside the estate. So, the old crime lord whispered, "Our enemy has taken her in." Daniel clenched his jaw. "She belongs to me." The old man smiled. "No." He leaned closer. "She belongs to whoever controls what's inside that backpack." Daniel's expression changed instantly. The backpack, the one Isabella had refused to abandon even while running for her life. Inside it wasn't money. It wasn't jewelry. It contained encrypted financial records, shipping routes, and photographs linking politicians, judges, and several international crime families to Romano operations. Evidence worth billions. Evidence capable of collapsing entire criminal organizations. And Isabella didn't even realize its true value. Back inside the estate, Isabella finally opened the backpack after making sure Lily was asleep. Her hands trembled. Folders, a flash drive, several passports, a handwritten notebook. She remembered the night she had secretly copied Daniel's files after overhearing him laughing with another man. If she ever tries leaving again, Daniel had joked, next time she won't survive. She had copied everything out of desperation. She never imagined it could ignite a war. The bedroom door opened unexpectedly. She instinctively hid the backpack behind her. The Mafia boss stood quietly in the doorway. He had noticed her panic before she could speak. His eyes settled on the backpack, then returned to her frightened face. "I won't take it." Those 4 words stunned her. 4 years every promise had become another lie. She searched his expression for manipulation. She found only exhaustion. "You don't understand," she whispered. "They'll kill everyone." His answer came without hesitation. "They'll have to reach us first." For the first time since arriving, tears escaped her control. Months of terror, years of regret, countless nights pretending everything was fine for Lily's sake. The wall she had built finally collapsed. She buried her face in trembling hands. "I thought leaving you would protect you." The confession echoed through the room. He remained perfectly still. She continued speaking through broken breaths. "They threatened everyone I loved. They said they'd destroy your empire. They said thousands would die because of me. So I disappeared. I believed they would stop. Instead, her voice broke completely. They found me anyway." Every bruise suddenly carried a different meaning. She hadn't abandoned him because she stopped loving him. She had sacrificed herself believing she could save him. The realization struck harder than any bullet. For the first time in years, he crossed the distance between them, not as a mafia king, simply as a man she had once trusted. He carefully pulled her shaking hands away from her face. Neither spoke, neither needed to. Their silence carried 3 years of unanswered questions. She leaned forward almost unconsciously, resting her forehead against his chest. The embrace lasted only seconds. An explosion shattered every window in the West Wing. The estate shook violently. Alarms erupted throughout the compound. Red emergency lights flooded every hallway. "Attack!" Someone screamed through the security system. The Romano syndicate had arrived. Mortar rounds slammed into the outer walls. Armored trucks smashed through reinforced gates. Hundreds of gunmen poured into the surrounding forest while drones buzzed overhead, transmitting live battlefield footage to commanders miles away. This wasn't an assassination. It was an invasion. The Mafia boss immediately transformed. The tenderness vanished. The cold strategist returned. Within seconds, he issued precise commands. Sniper teams occupied rooftops. Underground tunnels were sealed. Security doors locked automatically. Every hallway became a defensive position. Outside, the night exploded into chaos. Automatic gunfire echoed across the hills. Luxury cars became burning wrecks. Searchlights swept through smoke as helicopters circled above the estate. The Romano soldiers expected frightened bodyguards. Instead, they encountered disciplined veterans who defended every meter with terrifying efficiency. Bodies covered the gardens within minutes. Yet the attack continued. Because Daniel wasn't after territory. He wanted Isabella. Inside the mansion, hidden among loyal guards, a traitor made his move. One of the estate's senior security officers quietly disabled the surveillance system protecting the family wing. He opened a concealed service entrance. 3 assassins slipped inside unnoticed. Their footsteps disappeared beneath the roar of battle. Elsewhere, Isabella gathered Lily into her arms as explosions rattled the walls. The little girl buried her face against her mother's shoulder. "Are they coming?" Before Isabella could answer, footsteps approached outside the bedroom. The handle slowly turned. Not one of the guards. Not the Mafia boss. 3 masked gunmen entered with suppressed weapons already raised. The lead assassin smiled behind his mask. "It's over." Before he could fire, a knife flashed through the air from the darkened hallway. The blade buried itself in his throat. He collapsed instantly. The remaining 2 spun toward the doorway. The Mafia boss emerged through the smoke with lethal precision, disarming one attacker in a brutal close-quarters struggle before driving him into the wall. The 3rd assassin fired wildly, forcing Isabella to shield Lily behind the bed. A final shot rang out. Silence. The attacker fell, but as the smoke cleared, Isabella's eyes widened in horror. A dark stain was spreading across the Mafia boss's white shirt. He looked down once at the blood soaking through the fabric before lifting his eyes toward her. Then another sound echoed from outside. The main gates had fallen. An entire second wave of Romano soldiers was entering the estate. Blood spread across the Mafia boss's shirt, but the wound had only grazed his shoulder. He tore away the ruined fabric, wrapped a bandage around the injury without slowing his pace, and ordered his men to move Isabella and Lily into the estate's reinforced panic room. The steel doors sealed behind them with a thunderous clang, leaving only the muffled roar of gunfire beyond the walls. Outside, the battle reached its breaking point. The Romano syndicate had expected fear and confusion. Instead, they found a fortress that had transformed into a battlefield designed years in advance. Every corridor they entered became a trap. Every staircase funneled attackers into crossfire. Within minutes, the invaders realized they were no longer assaulting the estate. They were fighting for their own survival. The Mafia boss stood at the center of the command room, issuing calm, precise orders while security feeds flickered across massive screens. Then one monitor revealed the face of the traitor inside his own organization. The senior security officer who had opened the hidden entrance wasn't fleeing. He was escorting Daniel Cross through an underground tunnel leading toward the panic room. The betrayal had come from within. Without hesitation, the Mafia boss abandoned the command center and headed into the tunnels with only 2 trusted guards. He knew every passage beneath the estate, every blind corner, every emergency exit. Daniel believed he was walking into victory. Instead, he was walking into a trap. Deep beneath the mansion, emergency lights cast long shadows across damp concrete walls. Daniel reached the final security door with a triumphant smile, convinced Isabella had nowhere left to run. The smile disappeared when the lights suddenly went dark. Silence swallowed the tunnel. A single pair of footsteps echoed through the darkness. Then another. The Mafia boss emerged from the shadows alone. The traitorous officer instinctively raised his weapon. He never fired. A single shot echoed through the tunnel, and the traitor collapsed. Years of loyalty had been exchanged for greed, and his betrayal ended in the same darkness he had chosen. Daniel backed away, gripping his pistol with shaking hands. For the first time, the polished businessman vanished. What remained was a coward Isabella had lived in fear of for years. He shouted threats, blamed everyone else for his cruelty, and insisted Isabella belonged to him. The Mafia boss answered with silence. Daniel fired. The bullet struck concrete. Another shot, another miss. Each step backward stripped away his confidence until he found himself trapped against a steel security gate with nowhere left to escape. Before another shot could be fired, Isabella's voice echoed through the tunnel. She had followed despite every order to remain hidden. Lily was safe with the guards. Isabella stood only a few steps away, no longer hiding beneath oversized sweaters or lowering her eyes in fear. The bruises remained, but something inside her had changed. She looked directly at Daniel, not with hatred, not with terror, with finality. The man who had controlled every hour of her life suddenly realized he no longer controlled a single second of it. Daniel lunged toward her in desperation. The Mafia boss intercepted him instantly, disarming him and forcing him to the ground. Armed guards flooded the tunnel moments later, ending the confrontation before another life could be lost. The surviving members of the Romano Syndicate, seeing their operation collapse and their leadership captured, abandoned the assault. By sunrise, police task forces and federal investigators, acting on anonymous intelligence, raided warehouses, financial offices, and safe houses connected to the syndicate. The flash drive Isabella had protected through months of abuse became the key. It exposed money laundering networks, corrupt officials, illegal arms shipments, and years of organized violence. Arrests spread across multiple cities. Powerful figures who had believed themselves untouchable suddenly found themselves answering for their crimes. Daniel disappeared into the justice system he had once manipulated, where the evidence against him was overwhelming. For Isabella, justice did not erase the scars. Healing came slowly. Some mornings she still woke from nightmares. Some sounds still made her flinch. But little by little, fear stopped deciding how she lived. Lily laughed more often. The guarded child who once expected shouting after every mistake began filling the estate with drawings, games, and endless questions. Even the hardened guard smiled whenever she ran through the halls. The Mafia boss changed in ways his own men never expected. He remained feared by his enemies and relentless in protecting those under his care, but the walls around his heart were no longer built from silence alone. Strength, he realized, was measured not only by the power to destroy, but also by the courage to protect without demanding anything in return. Weeks later, Isabella stood in the estate gardens as the first sunrise she had truly noticed in years painted the sky with gold. The bruises had begun to fade. The fear had not completely vanished, but hope had returned. The Mafia boss joined her without speaking. This time, she reached for his hand first. No promises were made. No dramatic declarations filled the morning air. Some wounds required actions instead of words. As the city slowly recovered from the war that had unfolded in a single night, people whispered about the mysterious downfall of the Romano Syndicate. They wondered how an empire had collapsed so quickly, why its leaders had vanished, and who had orchestrated its end. Only a handful of people knew the truth. It hadn't begun with a gang war. It had begun the moment one man looked into the frightened eyes of a woman hiding bruises she could no longer conceal. And sometimes, the most dangerous revenge doesn't begin with pulling a trigger. It begins the moment someone finally decides that fear will never rule their life again.